Now, another source of conflict that we talk about in the 1920s was the role of women in society. It was not until 1920 that women finally got the right to vote. Now, keep in mind, this is 144 years after the birth of the United States. This is 50 years after male ex slaves were given the right to vote. Finally, women get the right to vote. Now, why is this such a big deal? Why is this so important? Because for 144 years in our nation's history, women could not vote for people they wanted to be their elected officials. Because if you can't vote, politicians, they naturally will know, they'll feel that there's no need to pass laws that affect you. Thus, they don't have to listen to your concerns. They don't have to worry about you voting them out of office. Having the right to vote is a constitutional right, and it's a very, very important thing to have. And again, it's not until 1920 that women finally get the right to vote. The primary role for women was still considered to be quote unquote at home, regardless if they had a family or not. Now, that's interesting. Even if they didn't have a family, their role was considered to be at home. Women who had the same jobs as men were paid only about 60% of what men made for doing the same work. Now, it's interesting. We could say, well, we've made a lot of progress since then. Not a whole lot. It's still around 75% instead of 60% of what men make. Today, it's even as low as about 75%. So there still isn't at least pay equality for women as compared to men. Women still only made up about 21% of the workforce in 1929. There were not that many options for working women. Most women could work jobs like secretaries, nurses, teachers, and social workers. These were typically low-paying jobs, and these jobs are still dominated by women, and they are still lower-paying jobs. Now, some women pushed back, against these restrictions, and they changed their hair, they changed their clothing, and lifestyle choices. They were known as flappers, and I want to talk about these particular ladies here. Now, the flappers in the 1920s, they were upset by the narrow choices that women faced. They wanted to be different than their mothers, their grandmothers, and different than accepted society. They wore very different clothing, and it emphasized a more narrower and slimmer figure. It didn't have the bust that was more enhanced, the waist that was very tiny, and then flared out into the hips. That look disappeared in the 1920s. They wore short skirts. It's interesting we call these short skirts. They considered them short skirts. Many of them hit just below the knees, and oh my goodness, they're showing their ankles in public. Kind of a shocking thing for the time. They did something crazy like driving cars. That was not considered socially appropriate back in the 1920s for women to drive cars. They drank alcohol, which was not considered appropriate for women. They cut their hair into bobs. And this is a style that you can still see from time to time, but that was considered a radical hairstyle for its day. They listened to jazz music, which we'll talk about jazz here in a little bit, but jazz was controversial, a controversial form of music. They did wear more makeup than their mothers did, and they had, for its time, really considered very casual attitudes towards sex, and primarily attitudes towards premarital sex. So those are the flappers. You see the role of women in society really changes quite a bit in the 1920s, and the flappers are probably the one group that stands out more than any other.